it's my pleasant duty to bid you all a very warm welcome. Thanks for joining us for another episode of The Fact, the series that brings you political international issues every week. Today, we have the privilege to be joined by two respected guests, Randi Nord and James Carey, and we would like to discuss about the war of Yemen. Please stay tuned. Would you explain a little bit to us about the current situation in Yemen and how is the current situation in Yemen on the ground?
Okay, so the current situation on the ground in Yemen, I suppose, as of the last 24 hours is starting with, obviously the Houthis have made some, Ansarullah has made some huge offensives in the last couple of days and taken some key positions, but as of yesterday was the shooting down of the Tornado jet, which is one of the largest jets that the Western powers offer to Saudi Arabia. This happened. We're not sure what the status of the pilot or anyone is at this moment, and obviously the coalition has retaliated for this, but at the same time, the things on the ground aren't looking so well for the coalition, obviously. Major mercenary bases have been taken over. You've seen a lot of ground lost by the coalition, a lot of important areas, and you've seen Ansarullah make a lot of progress. I expect you'll continue to see this, which, they've launched a new operation in defense of Sana'a, which has ended up taking crucial points from the Saudis. So even in defensive mode, they've managed to go on the offensive, and they have, frankly, they've turned things around. Although they've always held out strong in Yemen, they've turned things around fairly quickly. So I'm fairly impressed with this, and I expect we'll see more of it.
Mr. Carey, our next question. What is the importance of new series of operation in Yemen called Al-Bonyan Al-Marsoos?
As I stated earlier, the operation to defend Sana'a was a success. Like I said, it was an initially defensive operation, but it has gone on to take Nam, Al-Juf. You've seen advances by Ansarullah that, again, they can't. The Saudis have no counter, and these things were, I suppose, probably always coming because the Saudis really have never been able to get close to Sana'a. The GCC has never been able to get close to Sana'a. They've always bombed it, obviously, but for them to think that they were ever going to actually take the capital in any real way was a mistake, and the operation to break out has been a success, and that was, like I said, we've seen the downing of the jet. We've seen some Saudi retaliation, but at the same time, we have the Houthis, Ansarullah, still moving, still successful. The bombing raids will obviously continue, but this operation has clearly marked a turn because it's finally seen some a major breakouts after a period of stalemate. There's been a lot of fighting in Hodeidah, obviously, that is turning the way of Ansarullah, but as far as the fighting around Sana'a, this has been a stalemate for years now, where the Saudis just bomb, and the Yemenis retaliate with things like the drone attacks on Aramco and such, and that seems to be finally coming to an end, and I think it's a good sign, clearly. The Saudis are spending a lot of time and money on this war, and it's costing them a lot of international political capital, and the more that they're proven to be failures in this operation, I don't see Western support drying up, obviously. I don't, for whatever ungodly reason this is so important to our leaders here, I don't know. I suppose, we know that the Yemen war was a big trade-off by Obama for making the nuclear deal with Iran and such things like that, and same with, concessions to Israel and such. It was all done in the name of trying to strike the Iran nuclear deal under the Obama administration, but I don't see actual support for this war drying up anytime soon, although it's very clear that the Saudis and the Emirates are completely incompetent and they're not capable of carrying out something, even at a partial size of this operation. So it's I think what happened around Sana'a and what the key positions that have been captured was inevitable. I think the Saudis will continue to fight for them, but again, an army of mercenaries and jets isn't enough to do it.
Thank you so very much for your answer. We would really appreciate it if you tell us about the Ansarullah and if Ansarullah has the advantage and the upper hand in the process of this war now or not.
I think the advantage on the ground has always belonged to Ansarullah and the Yemenis. But this is, I can't state it enough. This is a large turning point, and we've seen since day one, since the storming of Sana'a by Ansarullah, when they replaced the coup government installed by the Saudis through their fake elections. It's been success ever since. Well, some of that success takes a lot of time to actually pay off. Things like Hodeidah obviously don't happen overnight, but a lot of you can't record anything the Saudis or the Emiratis have done as a victory, and it's even managed to drive their own coalition apart with the lockout of Qatar and things like that, and even led some, obviously not the main power structure, but some leaders in Western countries, or at least some lawmakers in Western countries, to begin to question the legitimacy of supporting this operation. We have a new bill going through the Senate where they want to limit Trump's powers on Iran, and we've seen similar things that, say Senator Sanders and Senator Rand Paul have tried to pass through to end some support for, the Saudis and the operations in Yemen. I don't know. I think this will continue to become more popular because, as I've said, the Saudis have never really held the advantage in this war, and it seems ridiculous to even think so based on, their history. We've gone years now, and they've not managed to break the stalemate in Yemen. They've not managed to break the will of Yemen, and now they have. It's become completely obvious how inadequate this garbage mercenary force and this, the Saudi military itself, the poorly trained Saudi military that's, I'd imagine, anti-meritocratic because it's full of, the fail sons of twice removed or 16-time removed cousins of the king or crown prince. These people are absolute failures, and to think they could win any war ever, and at this point anymore, is ridiculous. And to be honest, they haven't. And they've failed in Syria, they've failed in Lebanon, they've failed in Iraq, they've failed to strike at the heart of Iran, as they've always, clearly wanted to do with their proxies such as Al-Qaeda and ISIS, and they've failed in Yemen. And I think this is just another illustration of their absolute lack of competence. They have no hope of winning any war at this point, and I think the Arab world is, and Iran is united against that, and I think that they're facing a unified resistance which they've spent 30 years trying to make sure didn't happen, and whether it be from Tehran or Sana'a, there is a group of, there is the resistance that spreads across from, the bottom of the Arabian Peninsula all the way over into Tehran and eastern Iran, and, to some extent Russia has joined in to help these groups, whether that's sincere or not is a question for another day, but what's happened is that the Saudi designs for all of these places have completely failed. And I think you're going to continue to see that. And I think Yemen is the prime demonstration that even when they get their hands directly on an operation, when it's not a proxy war, when they're not just directing from the sky, even when they're hiring their own mercenaries to try and carry out these operations. It's a total failure, and I think you'll continue to see that. I think you'll continue to see the success of the Yemeni military and Ansarullah. I think it's the war. Who knows how much longer it can carry on? It will carry on, unfortunately. But I think you're seeing that it's very bare for the whole world to see. The Saudis are not any type of fighting force that they claim to be, and don't expect that to improve anytime soon, especially not with all their internal garbage going on. I don't think you'll see that. I think you'll see more victory in Yemen. I think you'll see strengthening of Iran's ties with Yemen at some point. You'll see, as you do with Syria and you do with Lebanon, what the Saudis do only brings people together more. You know, it's almost, it seems strange to compare it here to something here, but I mean, the more tired of, here it's capitalism, there it's Saudi aggression. You know, the more tired of these things people become, the more energized they become, and when they see a chance, they take it. And the Yemenis have seen a chance to free themselves finally from, you know, decades and decades of this Saudi control, and it's finally coming close to an end. The Saudis have to know that what they've done has become unacceptable to the Yemeni people, and I see that paying off, and I see the Saudis' incompetence and just failure as a backwards, you know, ridiculous nation led by this goofball royal family, and this their youngest, dumbest son is now in charge. You know, I see this going poorly. So more power to Yemen, and I expect that we'll see this more.
Would you please elaborate and tell us about your idea regarding KSA and Emirates trying to divide Yemen? Are they really trying to divide Yemen? And if so, how much do you think they are successful?
Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates have definitely tried to divide Yemen over the course of this war, and in some ways I would say they have been successful, but maybe not necessarily beneficial to both of them, and certainly not to Yemenis. I don't believe Saudi Arabia now, nor ever wanted to divide Yemen. Riyadh's goal from the beginning of this war was to maintain Yemen's status as essentially a client state of Saudi Arabia in terms of international diplomacy, trade, and politics inside Yemen. So Riyadh's strategy to maintain that meant allying with the UAE, the US, Qatar, Egypt, and roughly a dozen others to use military might, terror groups, mercenaries, and a devastating blockade to smash the Ansarullah movement. And we've all seen how that's played out. Their military strategy has completely backfired. Not only is the Ansarullah movement in full control of the capital, it's also in control of Yemen's most populated areas, the west coast, and even 3 provinces inside what's technically Saudi territory. And they enjoy quite a bit of popular support everywhere. But Saudi Arabia's team, the so-called internationally recognized Hadi government, has lost all of its support on the ground to parties allied with the UAE. And during the entire course of the war, the UAE has allied with the Southern Movement, which aims to divide Yemen into North and South again. So no matter what agreements they make on paper for PR reasons, to make it look like they're allies still, the UAE and the Saudis are really fighting a proxy war against each other in Yemen. It's really the same thing we've seen in Libya and even Syria to an extent. So I would say the UAE has definitely been successful in dividing Yemen. They've even been trying to court Yemen's Socotra into joining the Emirates, but Saudi Arabia has not, and that's been a big reason I think the war has kind of continued to drag on without any progress.
Thank you very much for your answer. Our next question is about any possible success, or if you think that there has been any success in the process of peace talks and negotiations happening or not.
The simple fact is that there has been no success in the peace process because too many foreign powers are involved. You know, we have Riyadh and Washington trying to paint Yemen as a civil war, but it's really Saudi Arabia, the US, and the UAE waging war against Yemenis who are asking for self-determination, and then all of these coalition partners waging war against each other too. When I interviewed Muhammad Ali al-Houthi in 2018, he explained that the United States purposely sabotages the peace talks. Washington will put forth a list of demands and says, if you don't capitulate, we'll turn Yemen into another Somalia. And, you know, this sounds right to me because there's so much money to be made that the United States wouldn't really have an interest in ending it. For one, Saudi Arabia's economy is on life support and unsustainable, and experts all suspect their oil reserves are much lower than they've been letting on. So it really needs to steal Yemen's resources like oil as long as it possibly can. Now, even this isn't really a good strategy because the war costs Riyadh some $200 million a day. That's very expensive for a country who already subsidizes almost every aspect of public life. And then there's the US, who generates billions and billions each year from arms sales. In 2018, over 52,000 airstrikes and attacks were launched by coalition forces against Yemen. So that's a huge chunk of money flowing into the US economy, which is already struggling to compete and maintain its economic dominance over China right now. So unfortunately, until Saudi Arabia depletes their sovereign wealth fund, which will also trigger a lot of unrest within their borders, I really don't see anything changing in Yemen.
Dear Randy, this war has brought so many losses and casualties for all sides. What could Saudi Arabia gain so far in this war? What do you think?
Honestly, I think a lot of what we're seeing today is Saudi Arabia trying to save face. Like the US, they simply can't stand to admit defeat on the world stage. I mean, the US has been in Afghanistan for almost 2 decades this time around. The only war that they admit they failed was Vietnam, and that was over 40 years ago. So the Saudis and the US are really one and the same here. And Yemen is really the only war right now that Saudi Arabia is actively involved in publicly. In Syria and Libya and Iraq, we know they're active, but it's through proxies and the United States and other allies. But Yemen is really Saudi Arabia's war, and that's very clear. And it's been a disaster for them from the very beginning. Not only is the Sana'a government far more militarily advanced and independent than Yemen ever was before the war, but the war has scared off investors inside Saudi Arabia as well. Look how they keep pushing back the Aramco IPO announcement. Aramco would have went public 2 or 3 years ago if it wasn't for the Yemeni missile strikes. So a lot of it has to do with saving face. However, I also think they're using Yemen's oil to fund the 2030 privatization strategy to an extent, which is a whole separate disaster for Saudi Arabia. I think that when this war finally does end, we will finally start to see the downfall of the Saudi regime due to domestic unrest and a bleeding economy.
We are really thankful for your time, dear Nord and Carey, and thank you also very much, our dear audiences, for being with us in this episode of the program. Hope to see you again. Thank you and bye-bye.